My concern now is after this experience, virtually everybody who can get a nuclear weapon is going to go out and get one, because that's the only way to be sure that neither we nor our Israeli partners are going to try and intervene and destroy their countries. And in fact, most observers that know more about the region than I do tell me that the Iranian government is now stronger than it's been in decades. The population has lined up behind it, which shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, we've been down this road before. This is just the beginning. And I think before it's all through, we're going to see the map in the Middle East change profoundly.
Well, everyone, I'm very honored to welcome back into the studio Colonel Douglas Macgregor, one of the great insiders into all things geopolitics. Colonel, how are you this evening?
Great. Good to see you.
Well, Colonel, it's so good to have you back into the show, because last time we talked about the escalation between Iran and Israel. Of course, the United States getting dragged into this. I want to know your initial reaction to this ceasefire between Israel and Iran. More importantly, what is the long-term consequences for both countries moving forward?
I think it's important to mention up front, because I get this question all the time. What is Donald Trump's strategy? What is American national strategy? And so forth. And I have to tell them, I don't see much evidence for strategy, because strategy means that you have a clearly defined purpose. You know how you want to achieve that purpose, and you know what you would like things to look like after you accomplish your purpose.
Right.
I don't see any thinking like that. I think everything is impulsive and reactionary or reactive. And that's part of the reason why probably you, I, and so many other people are confused as to what's happening. From day to day, things change dramatically. If you listen to President Trump today and compare it with things that he said less than a year ago, there's no connectivity at all. It's completely changed. He might as well be Joe Biden at this point. And his administration seems to have completely realigned itself to the Biden approach. So it's sort of reminiscent of something that somebody said recently. We keep voting for somebody that we think is new, who's going to do things differently, and we discover that we got John McCain again. And now increasingly people here are calling President Trump an orange McCain. Mm-hmm. So I suppose that in a nutshell is the problem. So when we ask, can you help us understand X, Y, and Z? That's not easy, because I just can't.
I want to kind of get into this because it's interesting. They're calling it a 12-day war. We've had a ceasefire now. Of course, all sides are claiming victory, right? Israel's claiming victory. Trump is saying it's a great victory. Iran has claimed victory. Did anybody actually accomplish anything during this?
Well, it depends on which side of the fence you sit. I think if you're sitting on the Iranian side, you have demonstrated several important things. First of all, that your arsenal is infinitely more powerful and more capable than perhaps even you thought. This man, his name is, I think it's Ben-Gvir, who's one of the inner circle members for Mr. Netanyahu and one of the strongest advocates for mass slaughter in Gaza and the destruction of virtually everybody who's not Jewish in the Middle East. He was heard on speaking publicly saying, when he was answering, why have you asked the United States to step in this soon? And he said, well, we underestimated the Iranian arsenal and their capability. I think they did. And they forgot the lesson that no matter how good your supposed defenses are, the enemy can always overwhelm your defenses with enough projectiles, with enough missiles. So I think we're learning that again. We should have learned that to some extent from the Russo-Ukrainian war. Right. So the idea that you can build some sort of air and missile defense that's going to keep everything out is absurd. The problem is that for every missile that is shot at you, you fire 2 or 3 back. So if 500 missiles are shot at you or 200 missiles, that means you've shot 400 in response. Inevitably, they're going to get through. We've always learned that. So I think that's the first thing. So from that standpoint, I think Iran has probably made its point. I don't know if I would call it victorious, but it's won its argument. The second thing is we have this problem in the United States where unconditional support for Israel and anything that Israel wants to do is the policy. Doesn't matter which party. It's irrelevant. Now, you can attribute that to many things. You can attribute it to the fact that we all love Israel, and I certainly have nothing against Israel per se, but I don't believe in unconditionally supporting any country in the world. In fact,
Correct.
come to think of it, I don't even unconditionally support my own. The problem is that if you take that position, then you are obliged on most occasions to do whatever the Israelis want you to do, give them whatever money they need, share whatever technology with them they demand. So I think that's been a problem, and it has brought us to this point in time. Remember, we never mentioned Gaza. Gaza is irrelevant, doesn't come up for discussion, but people die every day, every night in Gaza and continue to do so. The population there has dropped by supposedly as many as 400 plus thousand. How many have died from various diseases? How many have been killed outright? Who knows?
Right.
How many have left? I have no idea. But the Arabs have generally taken a position that they would rather die than leave their land. So I suspect that most of that is death in Gaza. That goes on, and that is a permanent catalyst for conflict between Israel and its neighbors.
Yeah.
And the notion that you're going to come to some sort of solution with Iran, which I doubt that everyone's going to be satisfied with, and that's going to solve the problem, is wrong. So that's a permanent problem. The unwillingness to step up and solve that, Donald Trump's unwillingness to face it, mention it, and do anything about it, speaks volumes. The Israelis have decided to join the celebration that Iran's nuclear development capacity is dead. I don't see any evidence for that at all. And my sources in the intelligence community here and abroad tell me that those targets were largely empty, that there was nothing there. So we destroyed nothing. However, it was great from an optical standpoint. We blew all these things up. Nobody stopped us. There were no air defense missiles shot at us. No jamming, no counter strikes of any kind against our incoming aircraft and missiles. And then subsequently, the next day, the Iranians obliged us by telling us that they were going to attack a target, told us in advance, told us where it was. And they obviously knew that we'd already evacuated Bahrain, the facilities there. So they blew up the airbase and sort of called it a day. It strikes me, and this I believe is true for President Trump, because if there's one thing I can say about him, I know he doesn't want war. Probably he doesn't know how to prevent it and how to stop it, or if he does, he can't do it. He did not want a war with Iran, and Iran does not want a war with us. I mean, that's clear. So here we're back again to the Israel question. Is there some sort of long-term goal here that will take us away from future conflict and hostilities? I don't see any. So how long will it last? 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, longer? Who knows? I think it'll eventually break down. Now, here's the last point, the most important one on my judgment, really. The Israelis are running out of cash and missiles. Smotrich, the finance minister, had spoken just a couple of days ago and said, we've got another week, maybe 2 weeks before the economy implodes. So there it is from the horse's mouth. We have no cash and we have no missiles. That's the other thing. They've shot most everything. Our own vessels at sea have shot off most of theirs. So you got to go back to port to reload. We aren't building missiles fast enough to keep up with the pace. And the question is, where does it all lead? My concern now is after this experience, virtually everybody who can get a nuclear weapon is going to go out and get one, because that's the only way to be sure that neither we nor our Israeli partners are going to try and intervene and destroy their countries. And remember that Mr. Netanyahu's goal, unlike Trump, he has a very clear, unambiguous picture in mind. It's called Libya. That's what he wants. And then remember the financial interests in London and in New York City that were strongly in favor of war with Russia, using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia to remove Putin from power, and ultimately to strip Russia of its resources by breaking it up and fragmenting it and so forth. That has failed. So now they've turned that strategy on Iran and on the region. They want the oil and gas fields. There's no question about it. And this goes back to another strategy that you've got to go back into the 90s when the neocons, people like Richard Pearl and Wolfowitz and others, postulated that if we can get control of all these oil and gas resources, then we have China by the throat. This is back in the 90s, before China became, in everybody's mind, the boogeyman. So you have all of this sort of business floating around. It's all involved. And I don't think this war in the Middle East is by any stretch of the imagination over. I think it's ongoing. This is a pause. We'll see how long it lasts and where we go from here. But I think in the short run, again, the president of Iran has said, we don't want a nuclear weapon. We are going to stay in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We support a nuclear-free zone.
Right.
Well, that would mean Israel would have to give up its weapons. If Israel gives up its weapons, it's not in a position to intimidate or bully its neighbors and to dominate the region, which is what they want to do. There is no greater Israel project without nuclear preeminence and the threat of nuclear domination. So where do we go? I don't know.
I mean, and just for our viewers out there, I believe Israel is the only country in the region that does have nuclear weapons, around 90 nuclear warheads. So they're interesting enough, the only one that does have them, hence why they can project that power and certainly aggression where they need, like you had said, this greater Israel vision. Let's talk about regime change. That's something that we heard Donald Trump say earlier. He hinted at regime change. It's obviously has been the goal of Netanyahu with many countries in the Middle East to get that regime change, almost going on this philosophy as if you do not support Israel and get behind us and our stance of not supporting the Palestinians, you need to have a regime change. And of course, the U.S. has launched many, many wars in the Middle East, to adhere to that policy. Do you think that this will continue to be Israel's goal? I mean, will they continue to pursue this regime change? Do you think this will even come from the United States in the future?
Yes, as long as Israel has the unconditional support of the United States for whatever it wants to do, which I think it still has, then it makes sense that they would want regime change. They advertised this former, or I shouldn't say former, but the uncrowned crown prince of Persia or Iran, the son of the Shah, as their candidate for puppet rule in Tehran. So I think that lingers, that persists. They would like to break up Iran. Iran is a multi-ethnic, I guess you could say multi-confessional as well, state. But I think they've discovered that certainly culturally, there's more homogeneity there than people anticipated, and the population did not turn on the government. And in fact, most observers that know more about the region than I do tell me that the Iranian government is now stronger than it's been in decades. The population has lined up behind it, which shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, we've been down this road before. And so Iran, this is a civilizational state, if you will, that rests on the foundations of Persian culture and history and language. And I think as a result, it's more resolute and more capable of withstanding external attack than I think anybody believed. Everybody was thinking in terms, I suspect, of Iraq. But Iraq, like Jordan and the Emirates, these are things that were created in the Versailles Peace Conference, literally by the British Empire. They're not rooted in very much. Now, you could certainly say, well, the people in the Emirates, they had places on oases where they had, capitals, and there was a sort of a nation state of some kind there. Okay, that's fine. But fundamentally speaking, these are not in the same category as Iran by any means. And the same thing is true for Iraq. One of two things is going to happen. Peace is going to break out, and we're going to join hands and sing Kumbaya, and it's all over. Or this is just the beginning. And I think before it's all through, we're going to see the map in the Middle East change profoundly. Because from between Iran and Egypt, all of those places could change. Everything could change. The Iraqis, for instance, or the people sitting in Baghdad at any rate that are Shia, view Kuwait as part of their country. I don't know that they'll act on that immediately, but we ought to keep that in mind. I think we're going to see more problems in Syria. We went along with the Mossad, CIA, MI6 plan to finally destabilize and destroy Syria, but the price for that was cooperation with Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. Now, Mr. Erdogan wants to control Syria from Damascus north. And Damascus is a great city of the Islamic world. One of the most famous and original Turkish sultans is interred there in the great mosque in Damascus. So I think there's a lot more going on there. And this sort of arrangement between the Turks and the Israelis, that they're going to sort of cooperate in order to exert some degree of hegemony over the region, I don't think it's going to last. The Turks are biding their time. They, too, have always known that if they needed a nuclear weapon, they could get it from Pakistan.
Right.
And I think that's true. So I think we're in for more. And then, by the way, then the only other sort of civilizational state that you've got that's rooted historically and has a strong foundation is Egypt. So it's, Israel and Greater Israel is wedged in between Egypt on the one side, Iran and Turkey on the other, with these sort of oil emirates in between, and the Saudis. I think it's all up for grabs in the future.
Do you think that Israel is going to be the one that's going to potentially break this ceasefire? I mean, do you think we've got peace for right now, but they're going to be looking for another opportunity as soon as, for example, we know for a fact that Iran's uranium has certainly not been damaged with these strikes. They already had said that they had moved the uranium to another place. Again, they're not looking to develop a nuclear bomb per se, but they certainly want to have it for civilian use. Do you foresee that Israel is going to go down that road and potentially this ceasefire would break with some Israeli aggression?
Well, from the Israeli standpoint, what has changed in the region? Nothing. In fact, this open-ended war that Netanyahu launched after the 7th of October, and by the way, I'm still convinced that 7 October was not an accident. I think that was allowed to happen. There were too many people on the inside in the Israeli Defense Force and the intelligence committee that warned about this, even to the point where the Egyptians, who have always dreaded Hamas, never liked Hamas, and they don't like Islamist terrorism. I mean, who would? It's got a brain. And they alerted the Israelis 24 hours beforehand. We think this is imminent. We know that. What happened? Nothing. And I've been there, and I've seen the Israeli position outside of Gaza, and it's very good. I mean, they had this thing wired tightly, and brilliant operation in my judgment. So this was not an accident. This then conveniently became the foundation for this broader regional war that Netanyahu and his supporters wanted to launch. Now, keep in mind that made a lot of sense strategically for Netanyahu because he's got control of us.
Right.
He has far more influence, power, and control in the Senate and the House than President Trump does.
Right.
So why would you give that up and walk away? Right now, nothing has changed profoundly here in the United States. We haven't really been hurt by anything. I think President Trump was worried about the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. He was sensitive to that. And again, I know him. He's not somebody who wants a war. The problem is, what difference does that make if you can't take decisive steps to stop it from breaking out? I mean, the man who was probably more opposed to war in 1914 than anybody else in Europe was the German Kaiser. Even the British and French ambassadors, on the day that war was declared and Germany finally entered the war, they both said that this is a very sad day for the emperor because he doesn't want this. What difference did it make? I mean, he could have taken steps to stop it. He didn't. So my concern is that nothing has really fundamentally changed at this stage, and we should expect more trouble down the line. And if who's going to start it? Well, if you take Netanyahu away, what changes? You don't like Netanyahu? Okay, Netanyahu goes away. They try him for God knows what else. He ends up sitting in jail for a while. Then he's pardoned and he's out. Retires to Miami or New York City or something. I don't know. So you've got what have you got then to replace him? Somebody else steps in. He's faced with the same dilemma. The same strategic conundrum is there, regardless of who takes over in Israel. So I don't see how you avoid another round, if you will. And I suspect each round could become far worse and more destructive. My concern from the beginning, and many Israelis were very angry with me, you've got to support us. And I said, I don't see anything good coming out of this. I have a bad feeling that this is a suicidal path for Israel. Right. Well, they say, we hate you. You're wrong. You're not the man we thought you were. Okay, fine. But I still believe that. And I think the last few months have proven it.
Yeah. Colonel, I want to know what you think about how is this situation being interpreted in Moscow and Beijing? What do the Russians, what do the Chinese, how are they interpreting this war and what this means for the future?
The Chinese and the Russians are interested in this One Belt, One Road project that is designed to essentially link, even integrate to some extent, economic interests across Central Asia, Eurasia, into Africa. In other words, the world island that we talked about for years, The idea is that you integrate this through rail, various forms of transportation. The railroad has just been completed from China to Iran, and they've had the first freight trains arrive and so forth.
Correct.
China knows that it's at risk because of the United States Navy. Chinese history teaches that their great vulnerability is this long coastline, and they're dependent on commerce over the seas. The Royal Navy came in there and made it very clear that China was at the mercy of the Royal Navy. Here's this little country called Great Britain, halfway around the world, and yet it can demand and impose on China. That is then followed by the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy. And the Imperial Japanese Navy repeats the process that the Royal Navy repeated, takes over the South China Sea and establishes itself on Taiwan. All the major invasions and attacks on China, with very few exceptions, were organized, assembled, and launched from Taiwan. So the Chinese they view Taiwan the same way we would view Cuba. It's a platform. And the Chinese don't want that. They don't want war, and they don't want to have to tangle with us because, frankly, in this world today, 5 or 6 nuclear attack submarines could shut down China from the sea in a matter of a few days. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. Right. So you build the One Belt, One Road, and it goes everywhere. And the Russians certainly see great benefit in this to themselves. And the Chinese need the Russians because without the Russians, there is no peace in Central Asia. That's what people don't understand. Right. Russia is key to peace and stability in Central Asia. The various leaders of the Central Asian states, we call them the stands, they all trust Putin and rely on him. They don't particularly care for the Chinese. That goes back to the Turkic Mongolian heritage and history. And the Chinese are very afraid of Central Asia. And one thing that both the Russians and the Chinese can agree on is they don't want another Genghis Khan. So there's a condominium of interest there. And the Russians, of course, want to do business with Europe. They need it. They've always needed good relations with Germany. They've needed German technology and engineering and know-how. They want that restored. They want a good relationship. Remember the Baghdad to Berlin Railroad that the Kaiser was trying to build back before 1914, because they were trying to build relationships. That was seen as threatening to Great Britain. So Britain then said, Germany's the enemy because this will do what? This will circumvent the sea. Right now, you've got a similar problem with the Suez Canal. If you can build through these railroads and pipelines across Eurasia, then you don't need to ship everything through the Suez Canal. In other words, there are a lot of game-changing strategic developments associated with Russia and China that we have decided, along with our British allies, to stop if we can do it. I think it's a waste of time, and I think we should try to capitalize on it, view this as something that could be positive for us. Nobody wants to say that in Washington. So a lot of that is behind all the machinations. And Israel, of course, is a creature of the British Empire. And Israel is very much in the vanguard of grabbing and gaining control of those oil and gas fields. That's greater Israel. It's all bound up together. So who thinks this is going to stop? Who thinks that President Trump can stand up and say, I've changed my mind, it's over, it's not going to happen? These are big strategic dynamics that are in motion now. Hard to stop.
Yeah. Colonel, I've got one final question. I want to relate this now to Ukraine, because we've seen a little bit of a shift from Trump as well, where he's already hinted that he potentially could start sending some more weapons to Ukraine. Of course, actually during this war, we did see the United States start shifting a lot of weapons over to Israel. Obviously, they are going to support Israel much more than Ukraine. So initially, this was a big loss for Zelensky. And I think now, though, has the focus now shifted back to Ukraine? Is this actually a positive thing for Ukraine? And what are your thoughts on this conflict? Is this the next chess piece that Trump needs to solve in his geopolitical game?
Well, Zelensky and Netanyahu, in their own ways, are very similar and in similar strategic positions. Although I would argue Zelensky is probably even worse off than Netanyahu. Right. Netanyahu is now in a cauldron of hate. The people in the region have collectively decided that they cannot coexist with Israel. It's a simple truth. And that's everyone from Morocco to the border with India and well up into Central Asia. Sorry, you can't do it. You can't call everyone Amalek, subhuman species that deserves to be exterminated, and then win friends and influence people. Right. So that's a bad position for Netanyahu, and I don't see that changing. Move to Zelensky. Zelensky has lost at least 1.5 million dead in this war, Ukrainian soldiers. He continues to lose every day. And the Russians are now doing something that they have been practicing, but they've gotten very good at it. And that is you systematically move forward across eastern Ukraine, eradicating all of the Ukrainian resistance that you find anywhere. So Luhansk, for instance, is now Ukrainian free in terms of resistance. And I think they're moving forward to the Dnieper River. I think they will cross it and they will go into Kiev and they will crush whatever is there and they will move south to take Odessa. Then Ukraine ends up as this rump state that has no outlet to the sea. That is, as it historically was for hundreds of years, entirely dependent upon the lines of communication that run back through Poland and Lithuania. Right. Because for most of its history, Poland, Lithuania is what controlled it. And then it was carved up into pieces. And for a short time, not quite 200 years, it was partially Austrian in Western Ukraine, which accounts for differences in the people and language and so forth that you see there. And what President Putin has always understood is that the people that live in Western Ukraine are really Ukrainians. There's no halfway house. It's not partial. And they're different. They speak a different language. They're a different ethnic mix. He doesn't want to rule them under any circumstances. So He just doesn't want to go there. That's more trouble than it's worth. And that's why the joke in Moscow is, well, perhaps the Poles will go back in there. And they all laugh because the Poles and the Ukrainians, of course, spent a lot of time trying to butcher each other and murder each other. So, but that's better from the Russian standpoint than going in there and stupidly trying to occupy the place. So I think Zelensky's days are numbered, and the Russians are coming, really, seriously, literally. And I don't think it makes any difference what we send to them. All we're doing is prolonging the death. I mean, Ukraine is a terminally ill patient on life support. The humane thing to do is pull it, and it should have been pulled a long time ago. Because once people know what that place is like and what the people are going through, they'll be horrified. This is not a nice place. And they'll look into the numbers of children that have been spirited away and women and God knows what else in that country. Ukraine is a tragic place. So it's on life support. The life support will eventually be pulled sooner rather than later. It'll be over. And I think President Trump is very frustrated because he made this statement, I could end that war in 24 hours. Well, of course, it's absurd. It's far too complex for that. And a failure, he has found it impossible to do something that I thought he would do, which is recognize legitimate security interests of Russia. But you see in Washington, D.C., Russia is a place to be hated. Russians have to be hated. Everything that comes out of Russia is bad. And given the nature of this current administration, I don't think they can change that. So Russia will win. Russia's already won the battle militarily. It's just now consolidating it. They will cross. They'll do the things I said. This thing will sort of sputter out. And the Europeans, they're looking at sweeping change. All of the so-called evil right-wing nationalist parties are poised to roar forward and take over. And that's, I think, something that the Russians are watching. And I think they will welcome that because those parties are absolutely opposed to war with Russia, as they should be. It's insane. And then we can stop deindustrializing Europe and reducing everybody in Europe to poverty and, abject failure. It's ridiculous. We increasingly are going to retreat back to the United States because our problems here are legion, and we're not addressing them at all. We're pretending to address them. So I think if you look at that picture, that's where we're headed. The only question is how rapidly do we get there? Is it going to be slow? Is it going to be? I think it's going to be what's the right word, in stages. With some things will go quicker than others in different places, but that's where we're headed.
Yeah. Well, Colonel, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and it's always I always learn so much, and so do our viewers. You have an incredible command of history and knowledge in the region and around the world, and thank you so much for your insights.
All right, sir. Thank you. Have a great trip.
All right, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.